All right, another round of applause for that amazing story. So our final class was on Monday, and the group asked if I was going to share a story, and I told them I didn't know. And they said that, I said this night was about them, and they said, please, we want you to share a story. And I said, I don't know, we'll see. And then I got into the car to go home, and there was a text message from my daughter. It was a video. And I watched the video, and I got tears in my eyes, and I knew what story and you wanted to share tonight. So this story actually starts with my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was 87 years old when I was born. I am the oldest in my family, and I am the first grandchild on both sides of the family. And for Lavina Wolf, I was the first great-grandchild. And as I was growing up, almost every Sunday after church, we would go to visit my Grandma Wolf. And my father would regularly say to us, now we don't know how much time we have left with her, so make sure that you make the most of it. When I was really little, I remember opening the very old metal cabinets in the kitchen and pulling out tin and copper cups and bowls. And I remember that they were light, but that they didn't break and that they made noise. And I would pretend to make cakes, and I would pretend to make tea, and I would take them over to my grandmother, and no matter what was going on at the kitchen table with the adults, she would stop and she would pretend to sip the tea or to eat the cake, and she would give me kisses, and sometimes she would hold me on her lap. And as I got a little bit older, I noticed that sometimes, depending on what I brought over to her, she would keep it and set it on the table, and she would tell a story to the adults at the table about whatever it was that I brought over to her. So I started to gather things around the house that I didn't know what they were, or I thought they were really old, and I would bring them over and I would ask her what they were. And I remember one time there was this really heavy metal thing with a handle next to the fireplace in the kitchen. And I wanted to know what it was. And so I picked it up, and it was heavy. And I brought it over, and it was so heavy I couldn't lift to put it on the table, so I was standing there holding it with two hands. And I said, Grandma, what is this? And so she told me to put it down on the floor. And she said, have you ever, you know how your mom irons your dad's shirts? And I said, yes. And she said, why do you think it's called an iron? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, that is why. That is an iron. It is made out of iron. And before electricity, if you wanted to press your shirts or a tablecloth, you would put that iron in the fire, and it would get really hot. And then you would take it out and you would put it on a stand, and she pointed to the stand that was next to the fireplace. And you would let it cool down, and then you would use that to press shirts or to press tablecloths, or to press your hair. And then she explained to me that if you wanted to straighten your hair, you would put your hair out on the ironing board, and you would take this iron and you would press your hair. And then she told me a story about the time that her younger sister had a date, and she wanted to straighten her hair. And so they prepped the iron, and she went to straighten her sister's hair, and the iron was too hot, and she singed her hair. And then she described the smell in the house of the hair burning. And that they had to cut her sister's hair before the date. And then she said to the adults at the table, I don't think she ever got over it. And the adults all laughed. And at that point, after that, when we went to visit my grandmother, I stopped playing on the floor with my siblings. I started pulling over a step stool that had a chair on it that was high enough for me to sit, and I would sit next to my grandmother, and I would listen to the stories that she shared at the kitchen table. Now, my great-grandmother was born in 1889. She had lived through both World Wars, the Great Depression. She was born on a farm without running water and without electricity. She had seen Kennedy get shot. She had lived through Pearl Harbor, the Civil Rights Movement. She had watched the advent of television and automobiles and the telephone, and she had watched a man on the moon. And even as a child, I remember listening to her stories and thinking, when she talked about her childhood, it was like another world. It was like a fantasy. And I knew that it was completely different than the way that I was growing up. And there was one story that I would ask her to tell me like it was my favorite bedtime story. And she would tell it to me energetically every time. And this is the story. Every harvest, her and her 9 siblings would help her father to harvest everything and get it to market. So they would put it into a wagon, horse and buggy, and he would take it to market. And this one year, her father and brother took the wares. It was a great harvest, and they made a lot of money in town, in the city. And her father and brother were so excited about the money that they made that they wanted to celebrate. And there was a man there selling exotic fruit from South America. And so they were going to celebrate by buying this fruit that they had never heard of before. And the fruit was 5 cents a piece. And then she would lean down and she would tell me, now 5 cents. Now remember, 5 cents back then could buy you 2 Hershey bars the size of your head. So, 2 bananas for 10 cents was a lot of money. But they were excited to eat these things they had never heard of, bananas. So they bought the 2 bananas, they each took a bite of the bananas, and they thought, why would anybody eat these? They're so gross. And they spit them out, and they felt like they got cheated, their 10 cents. They threw away the bananas. And then she would say to me, and why do you think that is? And I'd say, I don't know. She'd say, that's because no one told them you have to peel the bananas. And as a little kid, I would just laugh. And every time, even though I knew that's what was coming, I would laugh. Because the idea that, first of all, that a banana cost more than 2 Hershey bars was amazing. And then that they didn't know to peel it. It was like another world. My grandmother Wolf passed away when I was 13. She was 100. And 2 weeks before we had a huge party, and she was surrounded by 12 great grandchildren who continued to share her stories. And on Monday, after the class, I went to my car. And the video message from my daughter was a video of her sharing the banana story to her son, my grandma Wolf's great grandson. So although she is no longer with us, her stories live on. And that is Lord. Thank you. That concludes this evening. I am so grateful for each and every one of you being here tonight, and thank you for our storytellers. Let's give them another round of applause. Why don't you all come up here for one last round? People can get pictures if they want. Can all the storytellers come up here with me for a minute? All right, let's give them all another round of applause. Thank you.